The results are in for the US presidential election, and Trump is announced as the winner. Welcome to RIKS Europe, Pieter Cleppe, editor-in-chief.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So at this present time, votes are still being counted, but it has been announced already that Trump is in fact the winner, and it's said to be historical. He was the 45th president. He will now be the 47th president. And this time, the popular vote is in his favor as well. And also, it wasn't as even as people expected. Could you just tell us your initial reactions to these results?
Well, yes, you summed it up quite nicely. He had a bigger win than people thought. I think a lot has to do with the fact that Kamala Harris was simply not a strong candidate. In itself, there's no shame not to be strong enough for the position of President of the United States, but she didn't come across as sincere. She was flip-flopping on all kinds of topics, whether you talk about Gaza or about fracking, for gas. And it was actually quite easy, I think, for Trump to beat her. And it's just bizarre that the Democrats came up with her as a candidate. It was already bizarre that they nominated Joe Biden, who is clearly having very serious health problems. So they gave it away. I mean, Trump is a controversial figure despite his massive win. So you would think that surely they could come up with some kind of a Democrat to easily beat him. But then they came up with somebody that is actually not having the sufficient qualities in order to beat Trump. So I think it's not much more difficult than that.
And more importantly for the Europeans, what will it mean for Europe?
Well, of course, he's a little bit president of the world. People are rightfully following this obsessively from all across the world, certainly from Europe. Now, here's one statistic of all the active soldiers or the combat active soldiers on European soil. 70% are Americans. So that statistic alone tells you a lot what you need to know. Like, we are basically underage when it comes to defending ourselves. We have neglected our militaries. In Europe, certainly in countries like Sweden, Belgium, the Netherlands, but even France has seen a dramatic drop in defense spending over the last decades. And this is at the root of the problem. Now, Trump has said you have to pay your bills. You have to invest in defense because this is an alliance. We're supposed to be equal partners. He has said this, let's say, more aggressively than his predecessors, but ultimately he's delivering the same message. And let's hope that European governments finally listen. Let's also hope that they don't reinterpret this as a sign that they have to invest in a European Union defense, because that would of course be absolutely the wrong direction. Why? Because European Union officials do not have the legitimacy to deal with something as democratically sensitive as foreign policy or defense. Also, if you listen to Jens Stoltenberg, the former Secretary General of NATO, in September when he left his office after a long period, he warned against European Union defense initiatives. He said that some of them were already complicating NATO operations, were undermining our defense. So I think you can be sure that Trump will deliver that message home to Brussels. Some people in Brussels think, this is a perfect crisis that we can now abuse to get more common European debt to invest in all kinds of EU defense initiatives. No, I think it's going to be the opposite. Trump is going to tell them, look, please stop with this duplicating of NATO, invest in your own defense as per your NATO commitments.
A lot of the world leaders have already congratulated Donald Trump, including Ursula von der Leyen. What are your views on her congratulatory posts?
Yeah, well, she's clearly shifting a little bit, but make no mistake about it, she's just as obsessive about left-green, economically suicidal climate change policies. And also there, the election by Trump offers enormous hope. He's gonna leave the Paris Climate Accord. I mean, this is, of course, It's just an international treaty. It's more symbolic, but it's important. It sort of sends a signal to the EU that the United States is not on board with the climate policies of the EU, and the climate policies of the European Union are, in summary, more regulation, more taxes, more central planning. And this is at the root of the deep crisis in European industry, whether you're talking about car manufacturing or chemicals. Our natural gas prices in Europe in 2025 will be 5 times the level of the level in the United States, and the EU climate tax, the ETS in itself, is already higher than the natural gas price in the United States. So it's quite obvious why European industry is struggling to compete. So I think Trump will put a lot more pressure on European politicians like Ursula von der Leyen that want to continue despite all the economic damage that the climate change policies have done.
So Trump has threatened to impose extra tariffs on Europe. How will this affect Europe?
Well, that's of course a major concern, and ultimately this is a very bad idea. Tariffs hurt everybody. They hurt European companies that can no longer as easily export to the United States, but also this hurts American consumers. So there's been calculations that if this would go through, American consumers would see a lot more inflation than today. So I do think we have to look back at Trump back in 2018. He already said that, look, if the European Union would agree to lifting many of its own tariffs, then he would reconsider his own tariffs. So, Donald Trump is very transactional. He wrote The Art of the Deal. I don't want to sound too optimistic here, but it is also true that there is a deal to be made with Trump. And the same is actually true when it comes to geopolitics, the tensions with China. Trump will try to make a deal. He may fail, but he will try to make a deal for, let's say, some kind of a settlement with China in the ongoing de facto trade war that we're going through and the increased tensions. And as he has said, he will also try to talk to Putin. He will likely offer to Putin that Putin ends the war, but that he can keep at least a percentage or everything of the territory that the Putin regime has stolen from Ukraine. Will this work? Putin has an interest in keeping the war going. If you're an authoritarian leader in Russia, then it comes in handy to deflect attention from all the troubles at home. But Trump, he can be credible here. He can tell Putin, look, if you don't play along, I will actually give a lot more weapons to Ukraine than Joe Biden would ever consider. And what many people forget is that Trump has already done that. In his first term, he has been handing weapons to Ukraine, a lot more than Obama was willing to give. So whether that was the right or the wrong policy, it's clearly that he's credible to a certain degree when it comes to that in the eyes of Putin. But it's very difficult to predict if he will actually manage to bring peace to Ukraine in this way.
Thank you, Pieter Cleppe, Editor-in-Chief for RIKS Europe, for your insights.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching RIKS Europe.